Here we go. It's now recording. And this recording will be made available to you afterwards. I'm going to send the recording out basically to everybody. It's going to get both recordings. I don't know why you might want to watch it again, but you're welcome to do that. But also for those that didn't make it. So you'll get another email from me with a link to these recordings, and they usually expire after 30 days, unless I upload them to YouTube. I might do that. We'll see. All right, can I put you down there, fella? For you new folks joining us that haven't met, this is my sidekick, Gunner, 13-month-old Shih Tzu, and he is a big sweetheart and loves being close to me during the day. Not normally needing to be on my shoulder, but for whatever reason, that's how he's feeling right now. So let's go ahead and get things kicked off. Once again, welcome to the Zoom room and welcome to Change Your Mind, Change Your World. My name is Shannon Lee, and I'm the Executive Director of Relay, and I'll tell you just briefly about that organization in a moment. I am the author of a book called Servant Leader Mindset that was published earlier this year, and I'll get a link to that in the chat in a moment. And I also do some speaking at the organization. I'm responsible for three primary things. I mean, like there's a lot that I do, but three primary things. Number one, setting and overseeing the strategic direction of the organization. It gets set with our board, and then I oversee it and make sure that we're executing against it. Number two, I recruit, hire, and develop a high-performing staff. That's the second big responsibility I have. And then third, I create all of the original content that we use is actually created by myself. And I'm actually getting ready to share that responsibility with our Director of Community Engagement, Jason Otero. He's getting ready to create his first piece of original content for our organization. Super excited about that. And that's going to be, so this is one of our monthly free webinars, or really workshops. And I believe his is going to be in February, and it's going to be all about fear. It's going to be about not how do we avoid it, but how do we integrate it and really transcend and go from resisting to including to transcending fear. So it's going to be really, really interesting topic. So that's coming up. All right. So Relay is a professional development organization, and that's the boring way to talk about us. There are a lot of professional development organizations that have different specialties, and what I would say about us that's here in our description that makes us a little bit different or somewhat unique is our motivation. Our motivation is to awaken people to their best selves at work and beyond. And what we mean by awakening to your best self, it's kind of a call out that you are not broken, that we do not view professionals as people that we need to come fix, but rather that we partner with people to help them wake up to things that are already there, that are already true, that are already contained on the inside of you. And I believe our whole lives are a process of awakening to these things and choosing whether or not we grow into them or not. And so there are specific areas that we like to focus on when it comes to helping people awaken. And the way we do it, though, the vehicles that we use are things like transformational workshops like this one. So a workshop is anything that's, like 8 hours or less. So some workshops are 1 hour like this that are free workshops. We have paid workshops that are 6 to 8 hours. And those workshops, you can find those on our website and go to the training tab. But those workshops right now, since we're virtual, takes over a couple days, like 3.5 hours each day, so that we're not on a Zoom for 8 hours. Those used to be full day workshops in person. Maybe someday we'll get back there. We also have self-guided workshops that you can take advantage of online. We have just a few of those right now, and we're expanding those every few months, adding another one here and there. Self-guided is just what it sounds like. You sign up and you work your way through the content, and the content is delivered through things like worksheets and videos, downloadables, books, those kinds of things. Nope, don't touch the keyboard, buddy. So that's what our workshops look like. And then we have assessments. We use a couple different kinds. And then coaching, both group and one-on-one. And we do personal/life coaching as well as executive coaching. And I do some of that coaching, very limited amount because of my other responsibilities. And then we also bring in and hire contract coaches in certain specialty areas who we have a long relationship with and who we trust with our clientele. And everything that we do is inspired by the timeless principles of servant leadership. And so that's a little bit about the organization. Now, one of the things I want to make sure I let you know about, because I am super proud of this, and a lot of people still don't know about it, and that is the RNLI program, or the Relay Neighborhood Leadership Initiative. What this is it's how we ensure that we are creating an impact, because we too are a nonprofit. And up until about 5 years ago, our nonprofit primarily, okay, I'm going to put him down. Our nonprofit primarily engaged in the community through putting on events. And we still do 1 or 2 events a year now, but now, in addition to those events, we have all of this programming that I've already described so that we can really partner with individuals, teams, and organizations to bring about change. And we noticed that we had a really low participation rate from the nonprofit sector in our paid programs. And while some nonprofits have a lot of revenue where they can afford to develop their professionals, we found that the mid to small size nonprofits really struggled in this area. Why? Well, the research told us that these nonprofits are dedicating such a high percentage of every dollar that comes in back into programming. In other words, they're dedicating a high percentage of their revenue that comes in back into direct services for the people that they serve. And they're setting aside very little for professional development. Well, we could complain about that and say that shouldn't be, but instead we said, why don't we become a part of the solution and create a program for this? And so what we do, starting in 2017 and 18, we soft launched this, and we started setting aside a percentage of every dollar that comes in. We don't touch it, and we use it to provide the same training experiences, assessments, and coaching for individuals who work for nonprofits. And we do that on a free and sliding scale, and we call that the Relay Neighborhood Leadership Initiative. And last year, just to kind of bring you up to date, last year we gave away just over $55,000 in services. And if you're wondering about, well, what is that revenue-wise for your organization? Well, in 2019, that was a little over 16% of our revenue. So our goal was to give away 10% of our revenue in the RNLI program, and we exceeded that. And we're continuing to do everything we can to continue to give away and to give on a sliding scale for folks, because we believe, and we actually know statistically, that nonprofits and for-profits alike suffer from the same professional development issues. They suffer from the same leadership issues like engagement, productivity, turnover. All of these things are the same. It's not just because someone is working in an organization where there's a cause and they're passionate about it, doesn't mean that they know how to manage people. And so they experience the same management challenges. And we wanted to make sure that we were partnering and removing as much of that barrier as possible. So that's the RNLI program. How we're different, I mentioned that awakening the best. A more specific way to talk about that is to talk about the 4 aspects of any good learning and development program. And those 4 aspects are mindset, strategy, tactics, and accountability. And we make sure that we utilize these throughout our organization. You'll notice that mindset is half that arc. That's because at Relay, we specialize in mindset work. We specialize in emotional intelligence and really looking at things from the inside out. And so you'll find a lot of that in our programming. Today's workshop is a lot of that. It's very, very heavy on that. But we also acknowledge that strategy and tactics are necessary to support the new mindsets that we are encouraging people to embrace. And then helping people to become accountable people versus just teaching leaders how to hold others accountable, because there's a big difference there. And we go into that in several of our other programs. So Welcome once again to Change Your Mind, Change Your World. Let's go ahead and dive into our content today. So what we're going to cover is why supervising your thoughts is important. Now, you may have never heard the term supervise your thoughts. You may have never thought about the idea of thinking about your thinking, and maybe you have. Maybe you've never thought of it in terms of being supervisory, that it's something that you manage. And the reason why I love thinking about it this way is because it's a reminder that you are not your thoughts. You have thoughts. I have thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. My thoughts are not necessarily representative of truth or even facts, but a lot of what I think and pops into my mind that I'm conscious of, although the vast majority of it I'm not conscious of, the vast majority of that, I believe it's true simply because I believe it's a part of me, simply because I have the thought. So if someone does something and I feel offended, I believe it's true that they were being offensive. I make a conclusion about their behavior based on my thought, which is interesting because my thought comes from me and my experiences. Thoughts don't leap out of intention doesn't leap out of a person and enter into my mind as a thought. My thoughts come from me, but they are not me. And so supervising them becomes crucial because it gives us more influence and control over the results that we experience in life. So in that, then we want to understand the cycles of thought. What order does it happen when something happens and then we think? Do we feel something first? Do we think something first? How do we know? How do we identify these things? And then I want to talk to you about how we can halt cycles that don't serve you and then start cycles that do. When I say cycles, I mean cycles of thinking. Now, there are some benefits and some reasons that I think you should think about your thinking. That's a lot of thinking. Sorry about that. Number one, I believe that this is one of the most powerful tools at your disposal. It's your brain. Your ability to supervise what's going on in your thinking, which is a function of your brain, is something that is available to you should you choose to activate it, regardless of how rich you are or how poor you are, what color your skin is, where you were brought up, what neighborhood you live in, what car you drive, and how much money you make, what your sexuality is, what your political affiliation is. This is something that you have at your disposal that nobody can take away from you, regardless of all of those things. And so in that, to me, it becomes one of the most powerful influences over your experience in life. Number two, supervising the thoughts in your brain is the most control you have over the results you get. Now, I am not saying that if you just change the way you think, you're going to get everything that you want, because that's silly. There's too many things that happen in life that are outside of our control. But what I do believe, unequivocally, that when we're not supervising our thoughts, that we have less control and less influence over our results. And we will tend to, more often than not, to get the results that we don't want. And then we're left wondering, why does this always happen to me? And then finally, I believe a why is that it simplifies a process, a common process that is well known, but not well executed. And because of that, I'm hoping that it will inspire and equip you to grow. So this is a model we're going to be talking about today. I call it the Hula Hoop of Change. And I see a bunch of you on here that may have attended a Hula Hoop of Change workshop with me in the past. So I've added a few things to it. I'll be curious to see what you think about some of the new ways I'm talking and thinking about this. But this is the Hula Hoop of Change. And there's a couple things I want you to know about this hula hoop. First of all, you are in the center. If I had room, I've got this little desk crammed into my little bedroom in this little apartment, and I don't have room. But if I did, I'd put a hula hoop around my waist and I would start spinning it around. You are in the middle of your hula hoop, and you are responsible for what's in this hula hoop. Notice I didn't use the word blame. I didn't use the word blame. You are not to blame for the events in your life that were out of your control. You are responsible for the thoughts, feelings, and actions you have as a result of those events. Now, there are some events in your life that you are directly responsible for, and you are directly at fault or at blame, if you will, for creating. But I don't really like to think in those terms because I don't believe a lot of productive thoughts, feelings, and actions come from blame. But I do believe a lot of productive thoughts, feelings, and actions come from a sense of radical responsibility. In fact, there was a book written, I don't have a copy of it near me right now. It's in another room, but there's a book that I love, I highly recommend, that is called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leaders. And the first commitment in that book is radical responsibility. And they go into great detail about this. So I highly encourage you to read that. And if you only read the first commitment and you implement it, your life will change. That's how powerful this book is. So you have this hula hoop. Revolving around you in your hula hoop are the events in your life. Some of them you are responsible for creating from your results. Other events are outside of your control. You assign meaning to every event, every circumstance in your life. The meaning that you assign is largely derived from your experience, from your upbringing. It's derived from your belief systems. It's derived from trauma, parenting, you name it, education, religious influences. All of those things cause you to give meaning to an event. And the meaning you give to an event may not be the meaning someone else gives to an event. So you may have been brought up in a certain, let's say, faith tradition that tells you that when X happens, it means this. But someone else from a different faith tradition doesn't see it that way. Something in your faith tradition may tell you that you're right about your interpretation of that event. But that means that someone else in another faith tradition has that same belief. So who is right? In the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leaders, they talk about the ability to understand and entertain and even accept an equal and opposite truth from my own. And even though this isn't about anything religious, I like to use that as an example because there's a lot of tension for some people around that. And there's a lot of division around those things. You could pick politics. You could pick family backgrounds. You could pick all kinds of things that can potentially create division. But this is even happening in run-of-the-mill events in our life. Everything from that employee who ignored you to the cousin who always triggers you, but you don't know why. There's something going on in your thinking that is triggering that, and it's the meaning that you give the scenario. And that meaning creates your initial thought. And I want you to think of that thought as sort of like a ticker going across your brain. It's as Brene Brown says, it's the story you're telling yourself. It's the script that you associate with that instance. And I'm going to take you through one of those scripts in a moment. Your thoughts then create a feeling. The thought creates a feeling. And this is the order that psychologists, therapists, they all agree that we think, we feel, we act. But here's the thing. You're not always aware of it in that order. Depending on your personality, you may be aware, ooh, why do I have this bad habit that every time I feel stress, I have to have a glass of wine? That awareness is in my actions. Yeah. Some of us, we feel it in our body where emotions give us a physical sensation, or we notice it in our emotions, our feelings, and we say, man, I am feeling really anxious right now. I wonder what that's about. Some of us, maybe if we're more cerebral, maybe not, we're aware of when we're having a thought of one way or another, and we notice it before anything else transpires. But for the vast majority of us, this is on autopilot. It just happens. And no matter how intentional we learn to become about this hula hoop going on in and around us, the vast majority of your thoughts, feelings, and actions are going to remain unconscious. The goal is to think of the main ones that are causing you discomfort. I shouldn't say discomfort. The ones that are damaging to yourself and to others are the ones we want to work on, because that's a quick win and it can impact a lot of different things in our lives. So that's the order. We think, we feel, we act. Now, some of us have learned through social conditioning, for example, to disrupt this hula hoop between feeling and action. And this is what I mean. Let's say you're at work and your boss does something that's really annoying to you. And if you were at home, you would maybe mouth off and be sarcastic and say something snarky. But you stop yourself here, this arrow, and you're like, don't do that, Shannon. Don't do that. That's the fast track to HR or fast track to a pink slip, right? You don't want to do that. And we short circuit the process so that we don't do something we regret and get a result that is not what we want. Some of us are really good at that at work and bad at it at home. But here's what I'd like to propose to you. What if you didn't have to stop yourself in the first place? What if you could learn to retrain your thinking that whether or not your boss stopped being annoying or not, that it didn't actually annoy you? That you had a neutral reaction, that you were a calm, non-reactive presence. And because of that, there wasn't something you had to white knuckle to stop from doing, like mouthing off. What if when stressful events happened, you could allow them, you could manage your thinking and your feelings to where you didn't have to relax with a glass of wine? There's nothing wrong with having a glass of wine. I do think it could lend itself to being damaging when we use alcohol to buffer or numb ourselves from our feelings, though. And that's not just an opinion of mine. There are doctors who agree that this can lead to disease. So my interest is not in just getting you to behave differently according to this hula hoop, because that's where a lot of leadership development sits. If we go all the way back here, this is just not changing fast enough for me. I've got some kind of thing on here. I could give you a strategy for not doing the thing that you normally do when you get angry. A strategy for disrupting the feeling before you act, or disrupting the action before you do something you regret. In anger, we call that anger management classes. And I can teach you those tactics. But chances are there are lots of things in your life that make you angry, not just at work. Or there are lots of things that cause you to be despondent. What if instead I taught you how to manage that process so that when it's best for you and others, that you learn to assign a different meaning to things so that you have a different thought? Initially, you'll have to be intentional about it because, let's face it, we've all been practicing the way we think today for our whole life. I mean, things become a habit when they become repetitious and they're done consistently over time, right? If I pick up a dumbbell, a 20-pound dumbbell, and start doing arm curls, I'm not going to have a big bicep tomorrow or even next week. I might even not notice a difference in 3-4 weeks. But I'll tell you what, if I do that every 2-3 days a week for a year, this arm is going to be developed. This bicep is going to be very developed. And I'm not going to notice the subtle changes. I'm going to notice it at a point way out in the future where I go, wow, look at that. Look at that. Look at the work I did. And working on and supervising your thinking is the same development process. It's consistency and repetition. So that's my little introduction to the hula hoop. There's some key functions of this hula hoop or concepts I want you to know. They're not on the screen. If you're a note taker and you want to remember this stuff, here's some things you might want to write down. Number one, The thoughts and feelings and actions you have, we're not going to judge them. We're not going to say that's a bad thought and that's a good thought. And this is a bad feeling and a good feeling. And this is a bad action and a good action. We're going to morally neutralize this process. Why? Because as soon as I start judging a thought as bad, I take the initial thought, and I do believe that initial thought, because it's so ingrained in us that we don't have any control over it, that initial one. And there's pain involved in that if it's something very negative and damaging. And then we pile on pain by judging it and saying, oh, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong. And so we add guilt and shame to the thought. And many of us, the reason why we do that is because we've been taught through our life, through our upbringing, through our experiences, that change comes through shaming and guilting people. When we actually know that the most motivating way people change is not through shame and guilt. It's through love. It's through guided coaching. It's through encouragement. It's through appreciation. We've discovered this through years and years of study of human beings. That's what actually brings about lasting change. Now, when my kids were little, could I guilt them or shame them into changing immediately? Yes, I could. But as I learned and developed as a parent, I thought, my role really is to help my children as they age to develop a sense of goodness so that they learn how to regulate themselves from a place of who do I want to be? What are my values? Not, am I going to get in trouble? Because that's more formative. It's more productive. And so that's the second thing that I want to mention. So the first one is we're going to neutralize this morally. We're not going to think in terms of good thought, thought, good feeling, bad feeling. Your feelings just are. Are there good feelings and bad feelings? Yes, there are. Experientially, I mean. But we're not going to assign a moral negativity to something over something else. The second concept is this idea of being productive and unproductive. And when I use this terminology in our discussion today, I'm not saying how much you get done. When I refer to a productive thought, feeling, or action, I'm referring to thoughts, feelings, and actions that are more in line with three things: who you want to be, so your ideal future self. Number two, who you want to be right now, how you want to show up right now, and your value system. So when I ask you if a thought is productive, what you're going to think about as you observe that thought is, does this thought take me closer to who I want to be, how I want to show up right now, and my values? If believing that someone is being rude to me and taking offense is not the kind of person I want to be today, is not how I want to show up in the future, and it's not in alignment with my values, then that's a thought I want to challenge. I want to think about that a little bit more and decide on maybe you getting something that is more productive. So productive thoughts and feelings and actions move us closer to those things, and unproductive move us away. Move us away from who we want to be, how we want to show up, and our values. Okay, so those are two big concepts. Now, the third concept is this virtuous and vicious cycle that you see mentioned here on the screen. When you're in a vicious cycle of the hula hoop, you are involved in an unproductive pattern. It's a pattern that's not useful because it's moving you away from who you want to be, how you want to show up, and your values. And when you're in a virtuous cycle, you're moving towards who you want to be, how you want to show up, and your values. And so what I mean is, oftentimes we feel justified. Well, that was disrespectful, and I know that they meant it disrespectfully, so I'm going to justify my response based on someone else's hula hoop. Hear me here. We do not blame someone else's hula hoop. So if someone is disrespecting you and somehow you can know it 100% fact, that just creates a new event for you in your hula hoop. You have control over the meaning you give that. You get to decide what thought you want to choose, a productive or unproductive thought. which is going to create a damaging or desirable feeling. And it's going to give you or inspire a productive or unproductive action, which gives you optimal or suboptimal results. That's it. That's really it. And the reason why this is so difficult is because, A, we operate under a belief system that we don't need to change. We've got it figured out. I can't tell you anything if you're never wrong. If you believe you've learned it all, and if you believe you've heard this before, there's nothing new for you. You can't learn something new when you're coming at it from that position. But what I want you to ask yourself, is there an area in my life where I'm not getting the results that I think I could be getting? And what part in that am I playing? What actions have created that? And how was I feeling when I was doing that? What thoughts inspired those feelings? All of those things are giving you, in large part, your results. So I want to give you an example of this in real time. I recently worked with a client, a group of people actually, and we were having this very discussion. This woman just interrupted me. And she said, well, wait a second, I want to ask about a specific situation. It's someone who's not in this room, so it's fine. These were all supervisors. And this is at a manufacturing plant. And she was referring to someone on the line who worked in the line. This person, let me give you some background. This person didn't work for her. This person worked on a different shift. So the woman speaking works third shift, and the woman she was referring to worked second shift. And she said, and the shifts overlap a little bit so that supervisors can kind of communicate things to make sure things continue uninterrupted. And so many of the teams of these shifts on this particular line will briefly interact with each other in the overlap. And she said, there's this woman who, every time I try to talk to her on the other team, all she ever does is rolls her eyes at me, and it's just very disrespectful. And she told this very involved story, this historical thing, and she started crying as she was telling us about it. This whole room, there's like 10 of us in a room. And obviously this is very much more in depth than just someone's rolling her eyes at her. So I said, well, do you mind if I take you through the hula hoop on this situation, which is what I do in my coaching? She said, absolutely. And I said, okay, so let's hone in on that moment. I want you to imagine it's happening right now and try to conjure up that feeling that you're feeling, and the tears start to flow again. I said, what does it mean when someone rolls their eyes at you? Often asking myself, what does that mean, gives me the thought, gives me the ticker. It gives me the story I'm telling myself. And she said, well, it means that, you know, she used some expletives, but she said it means she doesn't care and that she is being disrespectful to me. I said, okay. So the thought that you're having then is, we'll just call this other woman Julie. Julie is disrespecting you. She said, yeah. And I said, all right. And I put this up on the screen, and they had it in their participant books. I said, how's that make you feel? Can you get clear on a feeling? Now, I'd like to ask each of you on this Zoom right now to get into the chat and see if you can identify any feelings on this feelings wheel. By the way, if you like to nerd out on this kind of stuff, the feelings wheel, there are lots of different versions of this. If you Google feelings wheel, you'll find lots of different ones to look at. Some have even more words than this. But something that you need to know about feelings wheels, about the general organization of them, is if mad is in the middle, all of these words in this kind of pizza pie here are derivatives of being mad or angry. Well, angry is right here, but of being mad. And when you go to this middle rung, they're a little less intense than mad, and then a little less intense out here. Because sometimes I might just feel frustrated, but I'm not quite angry. So put into chat, still waiting. Everybody wake up. What are some words on here that you could imagine you feeling, or maybe this woman, when the thought comes across her brain, that's disrespectful, or I am being disrespected? What are some feeling words? Frustrated. Yeah, Patty, for sure. As you populate some more ideas in the chat, I want you to notice something about this feelings wheel. It's one of the reasons I love it. Embarrassed. Yeah. So Patty, if you don't mind unmuting yourself, tell me why you think it might be embarrassing, that whole scenario, if you don't mind. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I don't mind. Sorry, I was trying to find my cursor. I think embarrassing because I have this certain level of, and she says disrespected, and I think at the heart of disrespect is embarrassment. Like I have this level that I'm supposed to be attending to, and in front of everybody, you know, she just called me out. Like I said something and she rolled her eyes. That's really embarrassing to me. Makes me feel like what I'm saying isn't important, that I don't matter, you know. And I think at the heart of that, like I'm embarrassed. The people around me aren't going to trust me either.
That's very intuitive of you. And here's why, because the rest of her story, she explained that this was in front of other people. And what was happening, sorry, someone's walking by, and of course the dogs have to say hello. So she was actually, the specific scenario, she was expressing some concerns she had to the other shift leader, just to let them know, like heads up about a couple things that happened on the shift. And when this conversation was going on, a bunch of the other line workers were around, and this Julie woman kept rolling her eyes every time this woman who was talking to me was speaking. And so, of course, that would make her feel embarrassed. You also mentioned, I think, you know, kind of called out, and I don't think you said inferior, but something along those lines. Some other words I'm seeing are overwhelmed. Thank you, Mallory. Yeah, I think someone might feel overwhelmed in this situation, depending especially on what they're trying to communicate. You know, like if I'm not being heard and the information's not being received, then that can feel a little overwhelming. Shame, Brett, thank you. Annoying. And then of course, why are they rolling their eyes? And then you feel self-conscious. Then you have to think that's their problem they have to get over. That's true, Raven. And if you can jump to that and feel that from your core, I think that's great. That's all a part of supervising that thought and choosing something new. But I think all of these are relevant. I want you to notice that the top part of the wheel are all what we would call negative emotions, or maybe bad emotions. In other words, they don't feel great. It doesn't feel good to be sad, mad, and scared. And then the bottom ones are more regenerative, so peaceful, powerful, joyful. And what I love about that is that all of these are a part of the human experience, and they're all valid. And we feel any one of these in a given day, like multiple ones. We can feel two things at the same time. You know, I can feel both insignificant, which is a part of being scared, and I can also feel aware of something, which can help me feel very powerful. So, you know, we are very, you know, we as human beings are very nuanced beings. And so we can contain more than one feeling at a time. And so she said that she felt angry. And so that put her right here. And she also identified that she felt hostile. And the reason why she felt the reason why she used that word was because it made her want to kind of get back at this person. And so that created a little bit of hostility. She wanted to make that distinction. Okay. So then I said, all right, we're just going to call this woman Brenda. I said, okay, Brenda, you had this thought, I'm being disrespected. You feel angry and hostile. What did you do? Do you feel comfortable sharing with us what you did? She goes, yeah, now I just avoid her. And what's sad is we used to be really close friends, but because this keeps happening and I don't even know why, I just avoid her. And I said, have you talked to her about this? No. I said, okay, so what results are you getting? And she said, well, it just keeps happening. So I guess I'm just getting the same old, which has created a new event for her. Now, what's interesting is, as this keeps happening, you know what Brenda's mind keeps telling her? See, she's disrespectful. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because the meaning we give a situation gives us a thought that creates a feeling and causes us to act in ways that actually confirm our original thought. So if this is happening to you over and over again, I want you to know, number one, it's not your fault. Because this is what happens. This is the way our thinking functions. What you can do, however, is to be aware of big patterns in your life. So I asked her, I said, Brenda, just in general, do you feel disrespected a lot? The tears start to flow again. Do you feel less than in a lot of places in your life? If I was coaching her one-on-one, I would say, do you remember the earliest, can you give me a memory of the earliest time in your life that you felt unimportant, that you felt disrespected, that you weren't being listened to? See, she learned somewhere that a certain kind of behavior means disrespect. She learned that. And all she has to do is learn something new, not to resist that feeling, not to say, you shouldn't be angry, Brenda. You don't be angry. Don't be angry. Just think positive thoughts, silver line it. No. The first step in disrupting and really halting this process is actually the opposite of resistance. It's acceptance. Now, acceptance is a big thing, and we don't have time to go into acceptance. Maybe one of our free workshops, if you all are interested, maybe we'll do one on acceptance. But here is a super duper fast track to acceptance, at least emotionally. And that is, I say to myself or out loud, I welcome the feeling of anger. I welcome the feeling of shame. I welcome the feeling of frustration, of overwhelm, of annoyance, of self-consciousness. Some of the other ones you all gave me. Yeah. I welcome it. Whoa, Shannon, why would we welcome that? It doesn't feel good. Listen, we human beings, we are wired for pleasure. The first thing we want to do when we feel something negative is we go, ooh, that's bad. We want to get rid of that. That does not feel good. That is a cold prickly, and I only want warm fuzzies in my life. And if I don't have warm fuzzies all the time, then there must be something wrong. No. My dear friends, the fact that you have negative, uncomfortable emotions just proves one thing and one thing only. You are a living, breathing human being. And the quicker you accept and welcome it, the less power it has. I want you to think of, hopefully every one of you, if you haven't been in the ocean, you can at least imagine this. But as you're sitting in a calm, moderately calm ocean, waves come and go, don't they? And that's what happens with our feelings. They're temporal. And they are not us. Just like your thoughts, like you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings. You have thoughts, you experience feelings, and you choose actions. But you are not those things. That is not your identity. Your identity is solid and unchanging, which is that you are worthy 100% of the time by default. The reason why we think we're not worthy, the reason why we think we're less than is because we judge these things and we add pain upon pain. And when we're judging these things, we think we're avoiding them, but we're not. And then we're feeling and acting according to that shame and that guilt, which is giving us results that are telling our brain, see, you're not worthy. When instead, if we say, oh, I notice I'm having an unworthy thought. I notice I'm having a thought of guilt and shame. I wonder what that's about. What's a thought I could introduce alongside that thought? Not pushing the old thought out, but what could be an and? And so in our example, to disrupt and then, or to halt and then kind of get this moving in a virtuous direction, I asked Brenda, I said, Brenda, what are some other thoughts that could be true for you about someone rolling their eyes? Now, remember I said that could be true for you. I think it's great if positive thinking works for you. It does nothing for me. Because oftentimes what happens in positive thinking is we pick the exact opposite belief, the exact opposite thought, and we don't actually believe it. And so the BS meter in our brain goes, nope. And this will not work if you don't believe the new thought. Belief is the activator of change. And so we've just never stopped sometimes to think about what else could be true. So get into chat and tell me what you think are other things that could be true that you personally would be willing to entertain, that you could believe about someone rolling their eyes at you or in your presence. What else might be true about that? I know, Raven, the one you shared is actually a new truth that could be embraced. That's their problem. It has nothing to do with me. So that's definitely one. What are some other truths that are believable to you? While you're thinking and putting some responses in there, something funny I want to share with you I thought was a little funny. A friend and I were talking about this concept, and she's in a similar line of work as I am. And we were bouncing ideas off one another, and she started laughing. She said, do you know, I was using this in a moment where I was frustrated with my husband, and do you know the only thought I could come up with that I could believe in the moment that moved me closer to something productive was, my husband sure does have beautiful eyes. That's all she could do in the moment to get her to disrupt the vicious cycle. That they are bored. Ooh, that's interesting, Patty, that I may have unresolved issues with this person that might be leading to them this reaction. What's interesting about that thought, Patty, is it's not a self-blaming thing, but it's almost a curiosity of, like, is there a part that I'm playing in this that I'm not aware of yet? I like that. Yeah, they could be thinking this. I've heard this all before. I'm bored with this information. If I'm a leader, and I've actually just coached someone around this, if someone is reacting to this way in a meeting, because someone else brought this up in a different session that I did, I said, what if instead you thought that they were bored because they're hearing you say the same things all the time? What if that was an indication that maybe you need to switch up your meetings? Rather than a personal affront, maybe it's an indication that you need to do something different. That's more productive. It could be an involuntary tic that a person has, like shrugging shoulders or tapping fingers. I once knew someone that when he felt stressed, he would start laughing. And there were more than one person were offended by that from him because they didn't understand that reaction, that like when things got tense in a conversation, he would start giggling. And a lot of people thought it was disrespectful, but it wasn't. It was just an involuntary reaction to nervousness. Okay, so the thought that she chose was something along the lines of, I want to make sure I'm remembering this correctly, something along the lines of that she is allowed to respond the way she wants, and I'm allowed to respond the way I want. So how this helped Brenda was it helped separate her from the other person's reaction. And it allowed her to stop white knuckling the other person emotionally. And what I mean by that is she was getting so mad that this was happening. This was in the other person's hula hoop, which she had no control over. And that fact alone was just driving her nuts. She wanted it to be different. And this new thought helped her let go of wanting it to be different. And the new thought was, well, she's allowed to show up how she wants to show up, but I'm also allowed to show up how I want to show up. And what that thought gave way to was a feeling of curiosity. Why? Because she started asking herself, well, how do I want to show up? How do I want to feel in this environment when this happens? And that helped her choose different feelings that she could align herself with. It didn't mean that every time it happened, she didn't feel angry, but it meant that she was able to start to entertain an additional feeling, a more empowering feeling. And although it's only been about a month since our workshop, if she's working on this and continually disrupts this thought, accepts what she's feeling, and then introduces something new that's believable, eventually when this happens, there will be no reaction internally. And that is true, true freedom. Now, something else. Hey, buddy, we're almost done. He wants to go outside so bad. So when we halt this vicious cycle, it's going to take intention and work. And what's really happening is we're exchanging limiting thoughts for liberating ones. A limiting thought is any thought that kind of keeps us stuck. Hopefully you can see that that person is disrespecting me is a wall. It's like, and now what are you going to do? But a liberating thought of they can show up how they want to show up and I can show up how I want to show up is more liberating because it opened up choices for her. And then when we have these damaging feelings, notice I didn't say bad feelings because not every bad feeling is damaging. Anger, sometimes you should be angry about stuff. If a family member of yours is sick or if a loved one dies, will you feel sad, maybe even angry for a while, grieve? Sure, unless you're a monster. That's normal. We're going to have bad or negative feelings in life. But when anger turns to resentment and we start acting out, that's when that becomes damaging. And this will help us exchange those damaging feelings and transmute them to desirable feelings. And then, of course, we can start to slowly shift our unproductive habits to productive habits. So how did she do that? So because she was curious and started asking herself how she wants to show up, she stopped withdrawing from this person. She started asking even more curious questions like, I wonder what's happening that would cause her to act this way. We used to be so close. And so do you know what she chose to do? She chose to go have a conversation with this person one-on-one. It sounds so simple to you and I right now. All of us are thinking, well, duh, why wouldn't you do that at first? When something's emotional, rooted in our history that triggers us, I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, but when it makes you hysterical, it's historical. Sometimes we don't even know where it comes from. And we can't see the forest for the trees, but someone else can see it clearly. And we were able to work through this together. She went and talked to this person. And she found out, and I'm not going to share all of it here because we don't have time, but she found out that something that had happened 2 years ago that she was totally unaware of had hurt this person's feelings. And they were essentially holding it against her this entire time. Now that's in their hula hoop. That wasn't in Brenda's hula hoop. But Brenda chose a more productive habit that was in alignment with who she wanted to be, how she wanted to show up, and the values that she holds. And she said immediately something felt like it broke in their relationship in a good way. And the next time that they went through a shift where they crossed paths, she didn't see the eye roll anymore. Now, there's still a little bit of tension in the relationship. Everything isn't perfect and rainbows and butterflies. I'm not promising you that. But I can promise you that if you're stuck in the vicious cycle and you're acting out of that damaging feeling place, it's almost never going to take you to a productive habit, just like in Brenda's vicious cycle. Now, there's going to be lots of opportunities for Brenda to challenge this same sense of being offended and I'm, disrespected, etc. But the more she works on it, on those individual scenarios, it's like they're table legs. And eventually the entire table falls. And her life is she's no longer experiencing other people through the filter of offense and respect. So, as I mentioned before, there are times when someone else's hula hoop bumps up against ours. And this is a big pushback I get here. Yeah, but what about so-and-so? They do this and they make me feel. Oh. What makes you feel? Your thoughts. See, this is Julie and this is Brenda. And originally Brenda thought, well, Julie's doing something and it's making me feel this way. Listen, feelings don't jump out of other people into you. That's not the way it works. No, Julie did a thing. It became an event for Brenda. Brenda had a thought about that thing, which inspired her to think a certain way, inspired her actions and gave her certain results that then confirmed her original thinking. But Julie didn't make her feel that way. And let's flip the coin. Brenda can't make Julie feel a certain way. It just so happens that Julie really received the conversation well, but Brenda originally said in the conversation, well, I'm afraid if I go say this to her and ask her these questions, she's going to feel blank. Again, the conversation that Brenda had with Julie only created a new event for Julie. Julie has her own thoughts about that event. She's responsible for those and the feelings. Julie's not aware of this hula hoop whole scenario here, but that's okay. That still doesn't have to dictate how Brenda decides to show up, who she wants to be in the future, and what her values are, and if she's going to act in accordance to them. We've all heard stay in your lane, you do you, right? But how do we do that? And it's remembering, where do my feelings actually come from? They don't come from my spouse. They don't come from my children. They don't come from the stock market. They don't come from my presidential choice. They don't come from how long we've been in quarantine. They don't come from that. They come from the thoughts I'm having about those things. And we can choose our thoughts. Last couple minutes, anyone have any questions that they want to post in the chat? Any questions you want? Thanks for that comment, Mallory. I appreciate that. I can't promise I'll have the answer, but I'll give it my best. Gunner's waiting so patiently. You heard me say 3 minutes. For those of you who arrived late, let me tell you who Gunner is. Let me show you. One of my puppies. Thanks, Patty. All right, well, I don't see any questions coming in. We'll go ahead and conclude. Just as a reminder, I'll send both recordings out to the entire group from both this morning and this afternoon, as well as a PDF of all of these slides if you'd like that. Something I'd like to let you know very quickly, you are welcome, Raven. It's so good to have you. We have lots of free learning opportunities at Relay. Of course, we have paid workshops. You can find all those on our website. Just go to the training tab that are both live, virtual. There are workshops that are self-paced, but we have lots of free resources too. We release a podcast every other week called the Slapcast. Just look up Relay Slapcast. You find it anywhere where podcasts are published. Thanks, Patty. The Slapcast is awesome. We actually are recording January and February episodes tonight, so I've got to prep for those. Also, we're going to continue doing these free workshops every month. And we haven't decided on January's yet, but I know February's is going to be about fear. It's going to be about stopping this habit of avoiding fear, but instead acknowledging it, accepting it, and actually using it and maybe even transcending it. So that's going to be really good. And if you ever have any questions for me or just want to reach out to me for any reason, here's my email and phone. You can call, and that number you can also text, believe it or not. So it is a cell phone, and I do respond to those, and or myself or our program manager, Shannon Welter, gets back to folks. So I want to thank you all again for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.